Hey, good evening, everybody. It's time for our ag look at the election, what we know so far. I'm Farm Journal News Director John Herath, joined by Jim Wiesemeyer, Pro Farmers Policy Analyst, and, of course, Chip Flory of AgriTalk. And we're going to have some other guests joining us here in just a little bit. But first, let's kick off with what we know at this hour. And Jim Wiesemeyer, probably the two most biggest solid things that we know at this point is one Senate seat has flipped and a key senator is keeping his seat.
Yeah, Luke Hickenlooper in Colorado was expected to defeat incumbent Gardner in Colorado. Mitch McConnell, more easily than expected, bested his challenger, Amy McGrath, who was well funded, by the way. So he'll either be majority leader again or minority leader once we figure out the Senate control. Fox News is reporting the House will Democrats will retain control of the House by at least 5 seats. And Wasserman of the Cook Political Report has said 10 to 15 seats, if not more.
All right. And right now, the story is centering around, as anyone who's been watching the election results tonight, so the story centers around Florida and Ohio. I think we all agree that there's really, even though the networks haven't declared it yet, there's no path forward for Joe Biden in Florida at this point. Wouldn't you agree, Chip?
Yeah, I definitely would agree. Decision Desk HQ called Florida a while ago. And it looks
They're the
like
only
it's
ones,
going
though.
that way. I've been watching Ohio and Texas very closely. Of course, North Carolina. Just in the last few minutes, the vote count in Ohio went positive for President Trump, and the vote count went positive for President Trump in Texas. We are still looking at it's unbelievably close. It's less than 10,000 vote difference in North Carolina with Vice President Biden slightly ahead there.
Yeah, it's some really close races. So let's bring in somebody else who's been watching this very closely, longer than the rest of us, because it's his day-to-day job. That's Tyson Redpath of the Russell Group. Tyson, thanks for joining us here. First of all, off the top, what are your observations of what we've seen so far develop tonight?
Well, clearly the investment the Trump campaign made in Florida has paid off. There was a lot made about how the campaign was out of money in Florida to run airtime and advertising. But all along, they said their focus was on that ground game. And the turnout in Miami-Dade County, especially among the working class Hispanic population, the Cuban population, has certainly, I think, surprised a lot of folks here inside the Beltway and even national commentators. As the Republican Party looks ahead into the future, that will be something to remember. There, I think, was rightfully some concern in Ohio amongst Trump campaign watchers and Trump supporters. Being a native of Ohio and having worked a campaign there at the presidential level, I can tell you that a number of rural counties are later to report than the city areas. And let's not forget, we are going to see, by some estimates, 60% of the votes cast in this election be mail-in votes. And so those early numbers that you see, those early numbers from urban centers are day of votes, and mixed in there as we go throughout this evening will be, in some instances, very delayed counting of those mailed-in votes. And that's just going to be the nature of the beast as we go on throughout the evening here with each of you.
Hey, Tyson, the conventional wisdom that we've heard all night is that day of voting skews towards President Trump, the mail-in vote, the absentee vote skews towards Vice President Biden. Do you think that plays out in Ohio?
I think it could. I think what also can play out in Ohio are those rural counties. Look, I think we've all heard you can walk from one coast to the other through red counties that are rural counties, and it's those counties where that Trump base he's going to rely a lot on that base. That base will stand out in freezing temperatures to vote for him and to rally with him. But is that margin enough to overcome those urban centers that former Vice President Biden is counting on to turn out in a more substantial way than turned out for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago?
I got some comments coming
John?
in. We'll get to your, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Decision Desk HQ has called a Senate race that we had as a toss-up. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina.
They're saying that Lindsey Graham is going to win re-election.
Yes. Right now he's at 55% of the vote. Jamie Harrison is at 43.75, and it looks like there's about half of the vote in there. But like I said, Decision Desk HQ has called it for Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, and that one really it never has tracked as close as some had projected in that, and particularly not what the money going into that race I certainly would have suggested, Jim.
Yeah, I think most people, at least in this town that I talked with, thought that Lindsey would still pull it out because it would have been a surprising element at the very end. But I don't know,
Yeah.
Tyson, you're close to that as well. But I think it's the popularity of Trump that's helped the down ballot that's probably helping Lindsey there.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate or fortunate thing, depending on how one looks at it, is when you combine the Jamie Harrison setting the all-time single quarter fundraising record, combined with the approximately $30 million that Amy McGrath was the beneficiary of in Kentucky. So 2 Democratic Senate candidates secured over $100 million for their Senate races, and neither of them will come close. And you just have to wonder where those resources could have been spent elsewhere that might have helped Democratic candidates that will look back at tonight and wish that they just had a few more dollars to spend that might have put them over the top.
Well, and Tyson, that Graham race really narrows then the door for the opportunity for Democrats to take control in the Senate, doesn't it? Not only because of Graham holding the seat, but also the momentum that it indicates.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I would read too much into that yet. I still think you have to look at Arizona. You have to look at what happens in Iowa. You have to look at certainly North Carolina, where Tom Tillis appears to be outperforming even President Trump. So there's still a number of Senate races out there that I think it's too early to predict with certainty how the Senate majority is going to fare just yet. But yeah, I think to get to the 54 seat majority that some Senate Democrats had cast aspirations of, that door appears to be closing.
Well, and as Jim and I have been talking for weeks now, that's really the number that the Republicans, or the Democrats need to hit in the Senate to really be effective, because of some issues like the filibuster. They would need more than that, 51, 52, 53, because they'd have some defections.
That's right. Joe Manchin, John Tester.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you brought up Iowa. We don't have numbers coming in there yet, but the polls are closing there. Chip, what have you been hearing through the day about that Joni Ernst race?
Yeah. The very, very early results had Joni Ernst slightly ahead, but Decision Desk has just given us an update, and it's still very early results here. I think we're talking about like 4% of the vote, something like that. But Teresa Greenfield has taken the lead in Iowa. And over in Arizona, Tyson, you mentioned that race. Mark Kelly has about a 57% of the vote there. And there's not much of the they're looking at about 25% of the totals reporting in already. So Mark Kelly is off to a very good start in Arizona.
Yeah, Tyson, Arizona must have been counting early votes ahead of time, because they've just dumped a whole bunch of results out there.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, it's remind me, they don't change with daylight savings time lapsing. Do they? So I'm trying to gauge what time it is in Arizona, but presumably the polls have closed there, and I've seen the same numbers that Chip just mentioned. That for Mark Kelly, he's off to a good start. Remember, for President Trump, I think to realistically have the pathway he needs to 270, Arizona's got to come home for him, I would think. So we'll see how that plays out moving forward as the night advances.
Yeah, right now on the Senate race in Arizona, with 69% of the vote tabulated, Mark Kelly holds 56.2%, Martha McSally 43.8%.
Yeah.
I'm going over to the presidential race real quickly, if it'll flip over. I'll give it, and while we're waiting for that to reload, Austin, we will get to some of your questions here in just a little bit. If you have a question for anybody in the group here, drop it in the comments. If you're watching on AgWeb and you want to comment, you can go over to the AgriTalk Facebook page and use the comments there to join in on the conversation. My page isn't going to reload, so we'll get to the Arizona presidential numbers in just a little bit. Oh, now here it goes. It finally went with 72% of the vote tabulated, 54.1% for Biden, 44.6% for Trump.
And all you have to look in Arizona is Phoenix, John. That'll tell you the whole story right away. It's not hard.
Right, exactly. And Maricopa County is 77% of the vote tabulated, and the vote totals track the same way that I just mentioned for the entire state. Let's talk a little Pennsylvania, because we had some comments about that is going, it looks like it's going to be a long slog for Pennsylvania, as everyone had predicted. Chip, I mean, we've been sitting at, well, now we're up to 25%. I've been sitting at 19% forever, but it has been long coming in with those numbers there.
Yeah, and it's I think a lot of us are going to be left shaking our head as late as early next week. We may still be shaking our head over why we can't get the results out of Pennsylvania. It will be interesting, and this is a good opportunity to get into one of the questions from Austin there. What do the commodity markets look like if we don't see a presidential decision tonight or for several days? Austin, that's a great question. I'm going to give you the standard answer. The commodity markets don't like uncertainty in any shape or form. So I'm going to say that it would be negative, but at the same time, I'm watching what is going on in the equity futures right now. I'm watching what's going on in the overnight trade, and there's no big move happening at this point. But the uncertainty, the longer it drags on, the more negative I think it would be. It would be more difficult to put a bid into the ag markets. I think I just don't think there's any question about that.
Well, and it also depends on what the reaction is. I mean, so far, the President Trump and the Trump campaign haven't really said much of anything, but I think how he reacts to that uncertainty is going to have a lot of impact on how the markets in general react. And let's bring in somebody else who knows a lot more about that than me. Tommy Grisafi from Advanced Trading's with us as well. Hey, Tommy, thanks for joining us tonight.
Guys. Good evening. What excitement we have. And Chip was just touching on the markets. And just as we logged in to check our cameras, the S&P 500 was down 25 points. And like Chip said, the markets, they definitely didn't like the early results coming out. You saw soybeans lower, corn lower. Then all of a sudden, I turned around, the S&P's up over 60 points. So beans already bounced. It's really exciting. And one of the things I think viewers have to realize, regardless of who the winner is that America's not shutting down. We're not shutting down for business in the way that people think. And so if we could survive a pandemic, we could definitely survive an election. This isn't our first rodeo. And I just think from my opinion of voting today, my wife voted, my daughter voted, and people want to live their lives. And it's been a rough go. Obviously, at this point, we've all lost a loved one, but America's open for business. And regardless, I think the biggest winner tonight, and I think the market's already showing you that, is America, regardless of what the final results are.
Yeah. Sun will come tomorrow. Will start the same way that today did, with the sun coming up in the east. We cannot forget that.
Yep. Hey, Jim, let's talk a little bit about a race that you and I have been talking about for weeks, and that is the Michelle Fischbach, Colin Peterson race. Checking it just now, very few votes tabulated, but Fischbach has the lead in the early tabulations, 57.8% to 37.4%. Well, let me turn to you, Tyson. We have been hearing that race is going to be very tough for Colin Peterson, the current House Ag Committee chairman. How do you think that ends up for him tonight?
It will be his toughest reelection challenge that he's ever faced. I don't think there's any question about that. I think he would acknowledge that. I hate to sort of say this early on, but it's going to be a real tough slog for him to get reelected. And I think as the night goes on, we will watch that closely. And then, frankly, probably what's most important is what are the implications for ag policy moving forward for the next farm bill, for the House Agriculture Committee. We shouldn't forget as well that Senator Pat Roberts is also retiring at the end of this Congress. And so when you lose Roberts, you lose Peterson, you lose Mike Conaway, you're losing over 80 years
Wow.
of farm and ag policy in the United States Congress. That's simply not replaced.
Well, and as Jim and I have talked with Colin Peterson in particular, it's not just one vote. When you get down to ag policy, in particular the Farm Bill, Colin Peterson brings a number of votes with him, with his House colleagues.
Yeah, and as we, as you look ahead to the 117th Congress and you think about biofuels, something Jim and I talk an awful lot about. Colin Peterson has been a stalwart champion of the renewable fuel standard and biofuels. And as we move ahead into the next Congress, where it looks like no matter the climate agenda, no matter who's in the White House, the climate agenda will proceed. There will be a healthy discussion over climate resiliency as it relates to infrastructure, and having that moderating voice for renewable fuels that Colin Peterson brings to the House Democratic Caucus. If he loses in his reelection bid, that will be sorely missed.
Indeed. Thanks to the good doctor, Jim Smith, telling us that CBS just called Texas for Trump. I don't think that any of us are surprised by that. Speak
Right.
up if you are. Okay, we'll move on that. It was closer than I think Republicans in the state certainly wanted it to be. And Tyson, does this give them a scare for years down the road? Republicans, I mean.
Look, I think when this electoral map is settled, there will be a lot of lessons learned. Texas has been trending. If you look at Harris County and the Houston area last time for Hillary Clinton, way outperformed even what Barack Obama was able to put up in 2012. Yeah, I mean, Texas is going to be something to watch. Georgia, whatever happens tonight in Georgia, is going to be something to watch. But conversely, I think that there are, Rust Belt states and sort of the Great Lakes region, which very well could, trend toward red, depending on how President Trump does tonight. I mean, certainly he won 3 of those important states in 2016. So the thing about the Trump presidency and this campaign, and frankly, the lasting effects of coronavirus, because it is a once in a century event, there will be electoral map shifts. And that tends to happen even without something like a pandemic. If you look at the states that voted for Bill Clinton in 1992, if you go back and look at the Reagan-Bush dynasty, if you will, for those 8 years, over time, population, demographic, socioeconomic changes mean that states do change. And that's just something we'll have to watch.
Well, in
Here's-
Dallas, I mean, in Texas, you've got Dallas with almost 66%, for Biden. It looks like Travis County, 73%, a couple hundred, maybe 300,000 more than, Trump, and Houston is also a big growing area. So, yeah, that'll continue to be more purple in the years ahead.
Hey, can I jump
question
in,
coming in.
guys?
Yeah, real quick, Chip. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to throw it over to Tommy because
Yes,
what's
sir.
going on here, Tommy? We got a big move.
Yeah. So are you talking about the stock indices, Chip?
Yeah.
Yeah. So right when you guys started talking, as there's one of these betting sites that's up, and obviously Zero Hedge is tweeting like crazy, but pretty much that betting site says you could still place a bet, which is not much different than the market some days, fellas. That it looks like a Trump victory. Now it's early and we got mail-in ballots and everything else. But as far as things looked earlier, what a wild move already. We've seen a $40, $50 move in gold. Crude oil's currently up $1. Dow Jones up 200. Corn's down a little and beans are back up a penny. Beans were down 5 cents earlier.
That service that you were talking about, it's a sports book out of Europe called Betfair.
Betfair, yeah.
Betfair. Right now, they are placing 74.2% odds or chances that Donald Trump will be a reelected president.
Yeah.
Really? Wow, that's a big shift.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, my wife Gina and I went out for supper tonight, and she said, I don't know if President Trump could win because all the actors and all the athletes are going to vote for him. And I said, don't let a few hundred people in Hollywood and a few thousand athletes that are even lucky to have a job this year. I said, we each get one vote. Don't ever underestimate the power of your one vote. I said, our daughters one vote's just as important as any athlete. So as any Hollywood star. And I think sometimes what's interesting, and you guys have already touched on it, is that all these polls, I've been watching these polls for 6 months, and election's not over yet, but it's even if Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, even if he won, the polls were just incredibly wrong. And when you look at these states, of course, nothing points out as much in America as how much red there is all over these states. And you just see the blue in the big cities. And as someone who lives 50 minutes from Chicago, I'm grateful. Our home value went up tremendously. So when you guys talk about this purple movement, you're just seeing it over and over. And I live right here in Indiana. Half the reason I have to have an office like this is because the Board of Trade trading floor is closed. And, the policy of the government picking and choosing who gets to stay in business is just absolutely amazing. And I know maybe that'll upset some people, but a lot of people are upset about a lot of things. So we might as well discuss it tonight.
All right.
There you go, Tommy. And I'm going to comment from Andrew here that I want to get to. Oh, you got results? Go ahead.
Yeah. Alabama Senate race, Tommy Tuberville.
Coach.
That's according to Decision Desk.
All right. There you have it. I want to get to this question from Andrew because I think it's probably what's on top of mind for most of the farmers listening tonight. And I'm going to throw this to you first, Tommy, and then to Chip. It says, if we have a Biden win, do you feel that China will back out on some of the sales over the past few months as they would not need to keep up with phase one agreement? Tommy, what do you think about that?
I would say no. What the grain markets and the commodities overall, we've went through a really bad downtime, and Mother Nature threw us a good link here. I mean, obviously, if you didn't have the yield, it stinks. But if you went and bought a used car for $8,000 and someone was willing to pay $10,000, why would you cancel that car? I mean, they bought the low, they own the crop, they need the crop. It's obvious they need it. But to really finish your question, Chip brought something up 2 months ago on his show when I was listening. He said, hey, guys, gals, you got to get this out of your head that unknown is China. That's not true anymore. And Chip was one of the first people to touch on that. So it's not just China buying our beans. It's Mexico. It's the Philippines. It's Japan. We're selling our product. We're selling meal. We're selling oil. We're selling wheat. And it's not just the phase one trade agreement. I think there's a major shift in commodities. I think all world economies are having to pump up the economies to keep them going. And that's creating a little strange inflation. And Chip's talked about it. I've talked about it. But there's a food security trade going on. And COVID may not go away right away, but we need to keep people fed. We need to keep food going. We cannot have what happened in the hog and beef industry, where the workers get sick and the plants close, and you're going to your local retailer and they say limit 1 pound of ground beef. This is America. It's 2020, and we're the best at the world at farming. We're not going to get caught with our pants down again.
Right. Hey, Tommy, you talk about those other markets that are out there. We loaded a boat for Brazil today. Brazil is out of product that they can export. So that's happening. Jim, I think this is a better question for Jim on whether or not. And the thing is, if Biden through the race would have acknowledged that the agreement was there and that he would try to hold China to the agreement, well, then it would be acknowledging that an agreement actually exists, and B, that it was a good agreement that Biden was going to hold it to, and that would be tipping the hat to Trump. So he never did. He basically never mentioned the agreement, did he, Jim?
No, and most people think that he would want him to follow through. China needs the products, whether you got a agreement or not, both in the hogs and growingly mega changes in their future corn imports. This is not just a 1 year off because of the rise of their commercialization of the hog industry. Where Biden, to be fair, differs from Trump is not to be so adversarial with our allies relative to trade policy, even though prior Democrat and Republican White Houses tried to deal with China and with our allies, and they didn't succeed.
All right, quick update here. Trump is widening his lead in both Ohio and Pennsylvania as the numbers continue to come in. Ohio now at about 75%, 74% of the vote in. Pennsylvania is still 30%, still a lot to tabulate there. And as we discussed, it could be a while before that comes in. I think Jim Smith has the best question of the night. Wants to know, where does that red telephone on Tommy's desk go? Is that right to the White House, Tommy? You got a direct line?
Yeah, that thing's not hooked up to anything. I just I found that in my storage closet today when I was looking for parts. So I put my advanced trading phone on the ground, and I'm glad you guys find humor in that. I tell you, it goes
maybe
upstairs.
you were the backup for the nuclear codes or something.
Yeah, no, that goes upstairs for me to order food. I got to stay well fed down here and keep these commodities up. So
get us some wings, Tommy.
Yeah, we'll get some wings. Well, hey, yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I want to do another update here on an important Senate race. And actually, this is Senate races. We'll go down to Georgia for it. David Perdue is leading. They have not called. This is Decision Desk HQ again. They have not called the state for David Perdue, but he is leading 55% of the vote, and this is within about 2/3 of the vote counted. So there's a chance that they can avoid the runoff in the Perdue Ossoff race there. The three-way race, actually it's a four-way race, but there's three players in it. You've got Senator Kelly Loeffler? Yeah. Senator Kelly Loeffler is being challenged by Doug Collins, Congressman Collins, and Democrat challenger Raphael Warnock. And right now, Collins is behind with 22.8% of the vote, but Warnock and Loeffler are very close at 28% of the vote. But that one looks to me, guys, like it's going to that runoff in January.
Yeah, Tyson, it's awfully early still in Georgia. Do you think Perdue's going to, if he does win, it'll go over 50%?
I would tell you that's not, I don't even know if folks close to him were expecting that. I think that both the Loeffler and the Perdue race were expected to go to that January runoff, meaning that really control of the Senate wouldn't be known until, the first or second week of January. I think that would be a surprise if Senator Perdue is able to squeak out an above 50% victory. One other thing I just got to note, Trumbull County, Pennsylvania, that is right across right across the Ohio border from Youngstown, Ohio, Trumbull County, Pennsylvania. Trump is outperforming in Trumbull County compared to his 2016 numbers. So there are some county level data that are coming in that are going to be very important to watch here in the next hour or so.
Good perspective.
And it is. And again, on that Iowa race there, Chip, in the Senate, Teresa Greenfield leading the early balloting, but it's the geography on that is not such that it tells you a story at all yet.
Boy, no, it's the city of Dubuque, it's the city of Cedar Rapids, Iowa City's in there, Davenport is in there, and Des Moines. We do have Sioux City is leaning toward Ernst. You know what? I spoke too soon on Des Moines leaning towards Greenfield. That hasn't been determined yet. But Dubuque, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Davenport, out of eastern Iowa, no big surprise there. So it's very much urban driven at this point.
But way too soon again in Iowa. You've got Trump down, over 20 points. That tells you all you need to know, that he's not going to, if he does lose Iowa, it won't be by 20 points. And in fact, he'll win Iowa. Yeah. So it's way too soon.
And Kansas in that Senate race, which I know a lot of ag folks have been watching very closely. 67% of the ballots tallied so far. Roger Marshall with the lead at 51.7%. He's the Republican there. Barbara Bollier with 43.7%. And then the Libertarian candidate, Jason Buckley, which is 4.6%, as expected. So a healthy lead for Roger Marshall so far there in the state of Kansas.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to predict something that hasn't happened since 1932, and that's a Senate race. So I think the Aggies can rest, go to another state, because Kansas is not going to go Democrat.
Way to set him straight, Jim.
Hey, John, let's get that question from our buddy Joe Gill. Do you see that?
So, Joe wants to know, can you give some perspective on what it would mean for agriculture if Congressman Peterson is not reelected? We talked a little bit about that earlier, but Jim, we'll start with you and then go to Tyson. What does that mean for ag if not only if Colin Peterson is not reelected, but then also considering that means a switch in the chair of the House Ag Committee?
Well, there you nail it. Who's going to be the new House Ag Committee chairman? Because we already have clear signals that the Democrats will retain control of the House. Will it be David Scott? Will it be Costa from California? Or will it be Marcia Fudge? If it's Marcia Fudge from the Cleveland area of Ohio, you would have a fundamental change in the focus of that House Ag Committee. Tyson?
Yeah, I mean, of the people you just mentioned, the important thing to know is two of the three are frankly urban representatives. Marcia Fudge from the east side of Cleveland, really a pretty big chunk of downtown Cleveland, and then David Scott from Atlanta, Georgia. Obviously, that would represent a fairly significant change in the leadership of the House Agriculture Committee. And then, Jim Costa, who frankly needs no introduction to agriculture, served for 20 years on the Agriculture Committee in the State Assembly in California, himself a farmer, and certainly well-versed in everything agriculture and trade related.
Hey guys, you mind if I jump in real quick on Colin Peterson? Living up in, I spend 2 weeks a month in North Dakota now. I live there part time, and that phone doesn't get the food up there like it does here. But in all seriousness, though, in all my years of traveling in North Dakota, I've never heard a farmer in North Dakota, badmouth Colin Peterson. And Colin Peterson's done as much for ag, regardless of your political views. And it would be a big, big loss to lose him. I can give you a list of 100 diehard Republicans in North Dakota who, trust me, if you're a sugar beet farmer in the Red River Valley, you sure appreciate Colin Peterson for everything he's done and possibly everything he'll continue to do. But agriculture's missing some leaders here. And even if it is a big Trump victory, The things you guys talked about earlier, Tyson and Jim, we're missing leadership in ag. Our guys and gals are getting older, and we need to get some youth here. I don't know that I'm going to put my name on the ballot, but losing Colin Peterson would be a big loss. The ads were brutal watching Fargo TV. They just claim him to be Nancy's little project, and that's not the man who he is, and that's not what he's done for agriculture, but that's the power of the media.
And there's some history here with the Democrats throwing out leaders in their party. Tom Foley in Washington years ago in the House, and Tom Daschle, leader in the Senate in South Dakota. So this could be a pattern.
Yeah, and I'll just share with you this story. When Colin Peterson was honored a few years ago, I had the great fortune to be in the House Agriculture Committee hearing room, and none other than John Boehner was the guest speaker. So it speaks to his leadership in agriculture, but it also speaks to his leadership as a bipartisan, consensus-building, traditional blue dog, middle-of-the-road representative that, frankly, are in short supply in Washington right now.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up, Tyson, is I know Tommy talked about, Republican farmers never having a bad word for him. Well, I've never heard a Republican member of Congress ever have a bad word for Colin Peterson in respect to agriculture. And you're right. If we do lose that tie between the parties, it's going to be felt because there are very few now who are willing and successful at reaching across the aisle like that.
That's right.
Austin checking in. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but says that Kansas Senate race was surprisingly intense. Dems putting a lot of cash there. That's right. Chip, you joke about, and Jim, you joke about that that Kansas Senate seat is never going to go Democratic, but I think the Dems saw some inroads there, and at least enough to dump some significant cash into that race.
We talked about that with Senator Moran. The amount of money that was spent on it. We had him on this morning, and the amount of money that the Democrats spent on that race, he made the point that you're making, John. They are looking to that northeast corner and trying to generate some momentum. If it doesn't happen in this election, maybe it happens in the next, is their thinking.
I think money helps you more in House races than Senate. Campaigns help you the most in Senate and the presidency, and I think we're seeing that tonight.
It's an excellent point, Jim, and the fact is Democrats could afford to pour money there. I'm old enough to remember when a certain president of the United States chastised the Supreme Court for its decision in the Citizens United case, talking about opening the floodgates to unchecked sums of money flowing into the congressional and presidential races. Democrats will have outspent Republicans 2-1, some over $8 billion to just a little over $4.5 billion for Republicans during this cycle. And when we talked earlier about South Carolina, we talked about the money flowing into Amy McGrath in Kentucky. We talk about the money flowing into Kansas. I love my Democratic friends. I don't want to be lectured again on campaign finance reform when it comes to Democrats raising money.
And Florida has indicated Republicans put a lot of their money in the ground game, and it looks like that helped as well.
All right, well, let's get a little different perspective on all of this. We've got our friend from the North, Sean Haney, hanging out. So let's bring him into the conversation. And Sean, first of all, how do we do the conversion from American votes to Canadian?
Well, it's 75 cents. Yeah, it's 75 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing we want is par. That's all I can tell you.
You and I were chatting on Twitter earlier tonight, and I was asking you about. I know you're tracking this because we talk to you every week, and you're a political junkie like the rest of us on here. But you said that Canadians really are following this election, and that kind of surprises me, just knowing how little we Americans follow Canadian politics. And what is the intrigue there in Canada, and how is this American election being seen up there?
Wait a minute. You mean we're not going to do this with the next Canadian election? We're not all going to get together like this and put together the analysis?
I'm in. You in, Tyson, Jim?
I'm in.
All right.
Absolutely.
I'm in. I'll have fun with that.
Yeah.
Sean, I'll give you an opinion about anything.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, we're bombarded by it. It is hard to escape it. We are on a normal week. We get a ton of U.S. media, and in an election like this, where there's so much drama and so many stories tied to it, it's everywhere. Canadian news agencies, basically running it as their top story for weeks now, and part of that makes sense. Though, forget about some of the drama and some of the storylines. It makes sense from a Canadian perspective, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same thing in Mexico, because we're so tied economically. And so whatever happens tonight or whenever this gets decided, depending on how close it is, it has an impact on the Canadian economy. We're a huge purchaser of U.S. goods as well. And so depending on what happens with trade and things like that, or some policy decisions that would be made by a re-elected President Trump or Vice President Biden for his term, it has an impact on a country like Canada for sure. And like I said, Mexico as well.
Is there a sense of where the electorate in Canada, who the electorate in Canada favors, or is it just as divided as it is here in the U.S.?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would say pretty heavily towards Biden.
Really?
Yeah, and a part of that has to do. Well, we have currently a Liberal government in Canada, so that's the way that Canada has voted in the last election. It's a minority government. There was a majority government before this last election, so. I would say it votes for Biden, although in farm country, in the rural areas, I even see some Trump signs and Trump flags flying, if you can imagine that.
Really?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, but some of that has to do with the same reasons why American farmers support President Trump. It's the same thing up here. And it's also a bit of a protest against some of the more left policies of our current Canadian government. It's a little bit easier to say, to throw it in their face and say, hey, I support President Trump even over my Canadian Prime Minister. So it's there's drama up here too. We're not isolated from it at all.
And would you say that's the majority opinion among farmers and ranchers in Canada?
I don't know if it would be a little bit more. I think it's a bit more split, but there definitely is support for President Trump. There's also a lot of conservatives I talk to up here that are pretty turned off by some of the things that he says from time to time. Now, if they had to vote, if it came down to if they had to vote for him, who knows how they go? But there's definitely some support up here for President Trump, and some of the way that he goes about his business, I think, is it attracts people.
All right, we'll come back to you here in just a little bit, Sean. Tyson, I want to turn to you because we've heard all this week about how there's probably three likely scenarios how election night's going to play out. Either it's an early Biden landslide. Trump makes a case early on, or you end up with something very close and very slow. What do you make of how we have developed so far this night with very close and very slow?
I think that's it. I think it's very close and very slow. Again, I go back to just the higher than average, actually historic high of mail-in votes that are just going to take some time to count, even in those states that have already started to count them, those states that can now begin counting them now that the polls have closed. I just think it's going to be a slow and arduous process because you had so many people mail in their votes and certainly way higher than normal.
All right, Chip, you were saying CBS was reporting that Donald Trump was planning on making a speech at some point tonight, whether there was a victor declared or not.
I don't remember telling you that, but I did.
Well, somebody tweeted it tonight.
Yeah. I did hear that President Trump is expected to make some sort of a statement tonight. I don't know what that. I can't even imagine what that statement might be on a night like tonight, but it sounds like he will be addressing the nation at some point.
Well, doesn't that come down to then a big question? Was Axios' story from earlier this week correct? I think that's what everybody will be watching. It's a tight race. He's ahead in some states and some races, and he declares victory. I doubt he does. I'd be surprised if he does, but I think that's what people will be watching as he hits that podium.
Yeah, but does he see it as an advantage to at least sow some distraction and some dispute into where the election sits at this point? I guess throw that to you, Jim.
He doesn't call the election. So if he does it, which I don't think he will or should, but if he does, I don't think it means anything. He does not call the election.
Sure.
Well, and that's, the national pundits have pointed this out. We probably should too, that, the election has never been certified on election night. There is a process that continues into January for the final certification. So even if everything went properly, we may have the networks declaring a winner tonight, but an official winner wouldn't be certified until days on in this process. All right. So as the rest of this night goes on, Jim, what keys are you watching?
Well, in the Senate, of course, we're looking at some potential surprises, and I would want Tyson's opinion on this. In Maine, is there a possibility that Susan Collins could yet pull this off and be returned as senator?
Yeah, Jim, I've been watching that too. Actually, the president looks like he's performing a little bit better than some had expected in Maine. That certainly would help Senator Collins. I'm watching John James in Michigan. I, for the past couple of weeks, have been talking with clients and others about John James. He's just a very attractive candidate in the state of Michigan. And the president, I think, is potentially poised to do well in Michigan. One surprise I'm seeing here, granted 60% of the precincts are reporting, so 60% is what it is. But Cheri Bustos, the chairwoman of the DCCC, that is the House of Representatives campaign arm, she is trailing her opponent right now by 4 points. So it's early, but that is, I think, a bit of a surprise for some folks here in D.C.
Oh, that is interesting. I'm going to flip over to that House race. I used to live in that district, so I want to see where those votes are that are being tallied there, whether it is Rock Island County or whether it's the more rural parts of that county that have been tabulated so far. What about let's look at the Ag Committee, and you've got Rodney Davis there in Illinois as well. Have you been tracking that race, Tyson? With Betsy Lundgren,
50%. He's up about what, 15, 16 points. Right now.
And he is battle tested. Remember last time it was less than 1,000 votes that I think he won by. Yeah, certainly a key member of the House Agriculture Committee. Certainly one of those House races that we want to pay close attention to.
Yeah, and the map I'm looking at doesn't tell me what counties that are in that 17th district in Illinois with Cheri Bustos, but that will be interesting to watch because she has ascended so quickly in the Democratic leadership in the House and really seen as a rising star there. It would be startling if she lost that race, don't you think, Tyson?
It would, and again, I'm not predicting that. She is a very capable leader of the House Democratic Caucus, but it's closer than I'm sure maybe he would have wanted to see at this point on election night.
Indeed. What other races are you keeping an eye on, Jim?
I'm going through. Well, of course, we've already talked about the Colin Peterson race, and I would add to that some of the internal numbers that I've heard from some of the campaigns were not looking very good for Colin, whatsoever. But the Senate, as we keep saying, even if Biden were to win the White House, many people tell me they still like a checks and balances. And so that's why you look at those critical races like in North Carolina and the closer ones in Iowa to see whether or not the Democrats can get a trifecta.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the polling here. And Chip, I'll start with you because it seems like the polling has another miss again tonight, at least with the numbers that we're seeing so far. The last minute polling was showing Biden up in Florida within the margin of error, showing a not insignificant lead in the state of Pennsylvania, which seems to be evaporating right now. What do you think the pollsters missed this year?
Yeah, I think the early voting is still playing on my mind here, guys. We knew, and I'd like to hear Tyson's take on this again, because I think it's important that we continue to remember this, that the amount of early voting that took place, it's going to give us some false signals tonight, isn't it, guys? I mean, I'm looking at Ohio, and right now Donald Trump 52, Biden 46. Michigan 54 Trump, 43 Biden. Pennsylvania is back to Biden. It was just a few minutes ago or moments ago was favored by Trump, but a chunk of votes came in because it's now 54% Biden and 45% Trump. But I don't know, how are those early votes going to have an impact? You can't determine how the polls have performed until we know the results.
So we know what the result. Yeah.
Yeah.
People are sure having a lot of fun banging on Nate Silver though on Twitter. That's for sure.
Oh.
You're all over him. It's a hard job, and when you have, like, I think Chip, you hit on it. When you have a variable like the early voting, it's, for the last 4 years, it's been, how did the pollsters get it wrong, and they got it fixed for this time. It's like predicting the stock market. Or the commodity market. It's an incredibly difficult job, and we're finding that out.
Well, they said they had a fix to it. So it's like, did they really? Did they still continue to undercount, the Republican votes, which I think is probably happening again. And but again, it's very early. You've heard or read the stories about the red mirage, the blue mirage. Be very careful. This thing can really change. And I acknowledge that. So until you're getting well into that 80 to 90% reporting, and then you look at the differential, and then you can make an assessment from there.
Yeah, then it becomes a math problem.
Yes.
Once it becomes a math problem, and you can prove it out that Biden doesn't have a chance or Trump doesn't have a chance, that's when you start calling things. And we're not there because of those uncounted votes in some big states right now. So it certainly feels like 2016 all over again. It really does. I don't know if I can say that. I was more confident in 2016 that Trump was going to win at 10 o'clock at night than I am tonight.
Right. That is right. And I think Chip's right. I think Jim's right. You just have to wait till every vote's counted before we can lay the people's elbow to the polling industry. Look, they missed in Florida. I think that's clear. And I think when you talk about national polling that showed the president showed the president losing by as much as 12 or 13 points of the popular vote nationally, ultimately we will be able to determine whether that's the case or not. One thing that does concern me is that polling has, I think, as more Americans have gotten interested in this race, in presidential politics, frankly, I think we can all agree we're probably likely to see historic turnout, 60 to 65% turnout. That the polling industry does influence and does sort of route resources, money, volunteers, having worked on campaigns, all of those things that campaigns need. And the polling industry, I think, does a disservice in some of those cases because the media, the headlines, the national pundits, national reporting, all of that leads you in one direction, and what follows is often money, often campaign workers, positive news stories, negative news stories. And so, I think we should wait on the verdict of the polling industry until all of this is done. After that, if they do and they have proven to miss yet again, I do think there's some folks, again, particularly in the business of reporting to the American public, need to do some hard accounting and ask some tough questions about the value of all of that. Because we can't just brush it off and say, well, the pollsters missed again, because it does have an effect. And look, the simple fact is, Trump voters, your typical Trump voter, is not going to pick up the phone or respond to an online survey or however else those methods of testing polling data are. I mean, it's just not. So, but let's wait. I agree with both Chip and Jim. You got to really see how it comes out at the end of all this.
And on Florida, Trump beat Hillary Clinton by 1.2%. It looks like he's going to beat Biden, let's say, around 4%. That's a signal there. That is a signal there. And will it carry over to other states, or is Florida unique in that? Those are the types of analysis that would be reported on it. But I just think in the covering of elections now, it's way too much polls and not enough issues. And had that been the case, we would have had a really good campaign of the debates of the issues, which I didn't think we had in this presidential campaign. It was campaigns of polls.
It's an excellent point, Jim.
Well, the one thing that Nate Silver, I did hear him say this morning, is that it is in a very thin line between this being a blowout and being extremely close, and it looks like it's the latter.
Yes. Well, in fact, looking at North Carolina right now, 93% of the ballots tallied. So getting close to the end, and there's only a 1-point lead, a 1-point advantage for President Trump at this point.
If he wins North Carolina, he is going to eke it out. No doubt.
Yep. All right.
Let's look at the needle. New York Times needle, 94% win probability for Trump, plus 1.8%.
Yeah, and they've been pretty aggressive on those key states tonight. I've been surprised at how aggressive the New York Times has been on those when the ballots that we've seen tallied at that point that they've made those judgments have been pretty even, and they've run out there and more often than not given the advantage to President Trump in those, Jim.
Well, they have data. They have underlying data by precinct and other things that make them feel comfortable, and I don't blame them for that. Yeah, so that's what I've been watching for the states that they're doing the needle on. Not many, this time. So I'll give them credit for their approach in that area.
Tyson, you advise a lot of ag clients. What do you tell those clients? We'll start with if there is a Trump reelection at the end of this. What should those clients be watching?
Well, I think first, we always say that people equal policy. And so the first thing I think we will watch for are cabinet changes. Obviously, the Secretary of Agriculture, the U.S. Trade Representative have had enormous roles in this cabinet, in farm policy and food policy and ag policy and trade policy. So first you have to start with, let's think about who could populate the cabinet in a second term. And then I think, secondly, you start to look out over the horizon and you think about, is he working with a democratically controlled Congress, House and Senate? Is it, by all accounts, it's going to be a narrower margin in the Senate. And so it really does sort of lend itself to think about what is the universe of possible bipartisan legislation that could be enacted. I mean, first of all, I would say that additional coronavirus recovery and relief will be at the top of mind of any administration. Where are we in terms of vaccine development, deployment, and what additional steps can be taken by the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services if vaccine deployment is delayed. For me, as we look ahead, I still believe infrastructure is the type of legislation that typically galvanizes both sides. Now, the issue I see with infrastructure is, we will have spent over $5 trillion this year on coronavirus recovery and relief efforts. Can we afford an infrastructure package at this point? I do think we have to get our arms around a $27 trillion debt, a deficit that has tripled in just the last 10 months. So, these are the sorts of things we have to think about. So when you talk about debt and the deficit, you obviously talked about revenues. If it's a Trump administration, hard to see tax increases coming into the fold. But at some point, we do have to start thinking about the debt and deficit. We know that President Trump has made a career, frankly, out of debt financing. But I wonder if Republicans in Congress are going to go along. And I think, frankly, you saw this in the Senate with Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, saying, we're not taking up another multi-trillion-dollar coronavirus. So those are the sorts of things we're talking about with clients. But above all else, how do we return to some semblance of normalcy in our everyday lives in the midst of this pandemic? It is one of those rare instances that affect every single American's life, whether your kids are home from school, whether you've lost a loved one, whether you're still working in your pajamas every day. I mean, it has affected all of us. And that is something that either administration is going to have to grapple with from day one.
And from the sounds of it, I think probably your response to those clients, if there's a Biden presidency, might be very similar.
Yeah, I think the only thing that changes with a Biden presidency, obviously, he's made it very clear that he wants to embrace climate policy, climate resiliency. We think that comes up in the construct of an infrastructure bill. But that would be the one change. On trade policy in China, I don't think Joe Biden can just walk back this tactically get tough approach with China. I mean, he's got members of his own party, and especially as it's become sort of an issue with his position previously in government and what that's meant for his overseas dealings. I don't think he can just walk back on China. He's got plenty of senior members in the Democratic Party that have talked a long time about getting tough on China. Will he embrace more of a multilateral instead of a unilateral approach? You bet. He'll try to engage more holistically with allies to confront China. But people that think that a Biden presidency means, we sort of drop all the tariffs and go back to normal with China, I think are mistaken.
So you don't think there'll even be tariff changes? You don't think Biden would drop some of those tariffs?
I don't, at least not right away. And I think he'd be well advised to hold those tariffs there until he can see concrete improvement. Does China live up to the phase one agreement? Keep in mind that phase one agreement has a year one for agriculture and a year two. That phase one agreement has certain benchmarks for other industries as well in terms of intellectual property, in terms of things that China has committed to. And I say this as nonpartisanly as possible. I think you want to see that China is making progress and living up to those agreements before you touch those tariffs.
All right, Tommy, I want to turn to you with the same questions, but before I do, should point out that it's past the top of the hour, so we have a new round of states in. As you can imagine, the left side of the map is pretty blue at this point, as expected. California, Oregon, and Washington all declared for Joe Biden as soon as those polls closed. Of interest, I know to a lot of people, is the popular vote because of what happened 4 years ago, and as it stands right now, Donald Trump leads the popular vote by some 3 million votes. We can get into that in a little bit, but Tommy, I want to ask you about the same question.
Here comes California on that popular vote.
Yeah, exactly. But Tommy, as you talk to clients, the other side of this, whatever day that ends up being, what do you tell them if it's a Trump presidency or it's a Biden presidency?
Well, I tell them to grow the bushels. They're in the bushel business. So regardless of who's president, grow the bushels. Both administrations have, no one's ever just left the farmer out there to hang, unless you guys want to correct me real quick and say, no, this administration 20 years ago, just maybe Jimmy Carter, but that's a different story. But in the last 12, since I've been involved at the Board of Trade in 1990, I don't remember farmers complaining so much about the president. I remember them complaining about weather, trade, everything else. The trade could be the president, but we have bigger problems than just who's president. When you look at when I was a young guy starting at the Board of Trade, China didn't even buy beans from us. Brazil wasn't even big into growing beans. So when you look at the world market, things have changed. People's appetites have changed. I don't think I have a single client who, if they announce Vice President Biden wins, who says, I'm not going to farm next year because Vice President, Biden is now the president. So one of the interesting things, to answer your question, you got to go on with your life. You got to grow bushels. A couple things I'm concerned about. I'm worried about changes. So you guys talked about how much money we're spending and everything else. And Tyson talked about our deficit. But you look at programs like crop insurance and all these other things. If and when we ever do decide to start having fiscal discipline, where are they going to get it from? I mean, who do you stop sending checks to with coronavirus out there and the hangover effect from it? So I think we may be in a much bigger phase of a bullish uptrend in commodities from both the supply and demand thing. One quick thing, I'll throw out a bomb to you guys. No one's talked yet on the show today about what do you see for 2024? If President Trump wins, who are the Republicans putting on the party in 24? And obviously, if Joe Biden wins, these guys are getting older too. We've had presidents die in office. We've had all types of crazy things happen. But I still feel, regardless of who wins, there's a lot of vulnerability. So you could find out Trump wins, and something bad could happen to him 2 weeks later. There's a lot of things that are going to happen, but I don't think any farmer in the world is going to go to bed saying, I just can't do this anymore because so-and-so won. I would be way more worried about Colin Peterson losing than I would be about the presidential election. That's how important he is to ag.
All right. Who wants to take on Tommy's question about 2024 first?
Let me go get some more wine.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take it on. I think if Trump wins re-election this year, I think he keeps it all in the family in 2024. I think you see another member of the Trump family taking it on.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. And I think if Joe Biden wins, I don't think there's any way he can run for another term at that age. And so he
would have to walk. Right? He wouldn't be able to run.
Yeah, exactly.
He'd have to walk.
Exactly. So you look, Kamala Harris is going to make a run, but I think she's got a pretty robust challenge in 2024 if she's the candidate, if she's the one being put forward by Biden.
Yeah,
well, if Trump wins, you have to see how. I think you'll see a far different Trump. Second administration. I think he would wheel and deal with the Democrats far more, than he has to date, because he would go on his history of what he has accomplished. And frankly, I don't think he's that much Republican anyway. As far as the Senate, again in 2022. You have a lot more Republicans up for re-election again than Democrats. So who you'd have to see if a particular party overreached, and if they did, then there would be repercussions. But 24, I just think it's too early, just too early.
So Jim, you just hit on a question I was kind of thinking about here. We talked a lot about a lot of scenarios of needing the balance and the checks, and having one party have all three places of the government could be dangerous. What about if Trump does win tonight and the Democrats have the Senate and the House? What exactly does that look like?
Well, Trump's a spender, so I think he would go along on infrastructure, let it rip. I think he's more aligned with Democrats when it comes to infrastructure spending than the Republicans in the Senate. So, I mean, look at his history.
Yeah.
He's debt financing. So, that debt's going to go higher and higher and higher.
Yeah. The thing that I keep thinking about on the infrastructure is that defining infrastructure for the Republicans looks a little different than it does for the Democrats. And if we do have the checks and balances in place, we go through another 4 years of talking about how infrastructure is a bipartisan project, and we just don't see a whole lot happen.
Interesting race update here real quickly. In the Georgia special election, Congressman Doug Collins has conceded that special election. He was polling third and has offered to throw his support behind Kelly Loeffler in the January 5th runoff there. So and it looks very, very likely to be going into a runoff election there.
And Perdue is still at that 55% area with over 60% of the vote to Ossoff's 43%.
I think they're gonna be surprised if there isn't a runoff there. Yeah, like Tyson was saying.
Yeah, that'll save him a lot of cash, won't it, Tyson?
Well, they have a lot. They spend a lot. So,
yes, they have.
Yeah.
But Tyson, wouldn't you agree if one or both of those Georgia races goes to a runoff on the 5th, I think, of January, that typically favors a Republican candidate because of who comes to the voting booths again?
Yeah, that's right. Remember, the turnout in Atlanta and the turnout for Joe Biden will not be there. So this electorate will be smaller for the runoff in Georgia. And I tend to agree with you, Jim. I think the and especially if Trump is reelected and you have a 50, well, at that point, I guess it could be a 50-49. My point being a very close Senate, you're going to see a lot of Republican vigor go into making sure that Senate seat is kept in Republican hands.
And in the Georgia race, if Collins wouldn't have had his fight with Loeffler, Loeffler would have been perhaps not 1-for-1 vote, but right at that 50% mark.
Yeah, and Jim, that's a great point. I mean, there were a lot of people that were scratching their head when Doug Collins decided to challenge her. Really a curious decision. And the NRSC, again, credit to Todd Young, the chairman of the NRSC, senator from Indiana, just a fine public servant, by the way. And Mitch McConnell, I mean, the NRSC, I don't think wavered on that. They were clear up front, we are sticking behind Loeffler, and Doug Collins, go about your merry way. But it was a curious decision at the time that he decided to run for that.
Here's what I want to ask you, Tyson, real quickly. With the Democrats looking like they'll retain the House and increasing it by at least 5, if not 15 or more, what does that say about Kevin McCarthy? My good friend David Wasserman of the Cook Political Report speculated the possibility that he could be challenged for the leadership in the Republican House.
Jim, you put me on the spot here, but because the House Republicans are sort of where I grew up. Look, I'll say this. I mean, it would seem difficult to imagine that you've now gone through 2 election cycles, having lost, a fairly sizable chunk of seats, and not had some leadership shakeup. Now, the leader last week was asked and said he feels very strongly that he has the votes. But look, you've gone 2 election cycles now. You will go potentially an election cycle in which the top of your party prevails and is reelected to the White House, but yet you still lost seats. I would have to think that the rank and file in the House Republican Conference will look around and say, look, what changes are needed? What changes are we prepared to make in terms of our leadership to get us competitive again? Because, here you're talking about a night in which the president seems to be doing at least okay. And, House Republicans are poised to lose more seats. The other thing I would say is for House Republicans, you got to take a look at redistricting. What we haven't talked about yet tonight are the state legislature races across the country that will go a long way in determining how those congressional House seats are redrawn and how the gerrymandering plays out over the next 2 years. So what looks to be, a less than desirable evening on paper for House Republicans could get even worse as we head into a 2022 midterm. And so, all that would suggest that I think House Republicans are going to have to take some time and think about, what are those next steps we need to sort of gain a foothold and be competitive again.
I want to give those watching online a heads up that we're going to kind of do one last run through the map and some last comments here, unless something breaks in the next few minutes on the map. So if you've got a question that you want us to answer, be sure to get it in on the comment section there, because we do want to hear from you and answer whatever questions you have as this night plays out. Turning to the map, Chip, looking at Iowa with 58% of the votes reported. Biden with a not insignificant lead, 51.3% to 46.9%. But in looking at the map, you've got Polk County is 95% reported now. Right. Waiting for the map to catch up. Boone County, 57%, so still some there. Dubuque, Johnson County is at 94%. So the Democratic areas are pretty well represented in that tally at this point, and there's a lot of red in that Iowa map still to develop here.
Yeah. It feels like the momentum for the state is pushing toward Trump. The gap between Ernst and Greenfield has narrowed considerably. It feels to me like some of those west central Iowa counties that are very likely to vote Republican and support Ernst are going to be are going to move the needle for Senator Ernst. And I need to remind people that in the state of Iowa, we've got 3 Democrat representatives and a Republican representative, and it feels like that's the way that it is going to stay. And when you look at the House or the map again, I guess maybe there is still a way for Hinson to take out Finkenauer, but boy, that looks like a tough job for Hinson there. I would guess that Rita Hart is going to beat Miller Meeks. So that'll keep the 2nd district as a Democrat. 3rd district, this is a closer race than what I anticipated, and this is where Senator Ernst is from. That 3rd district is closer than what I thought it was going to be. You've got Cindy Axney down there, and she is the challenge from David Young is considerable, and there are 3rd district counties that still need to report in. I mean, there's only We're looking at what is it? About they're pushing 80% has come in the 3rd district. So it's getting close where you can call it for Axne, but not quite there yet. And the race between Republican Feenstra and Democrat Schulten up in the Northwest district, that's that 4th district that is open, looks to be heading toward the Republican there.
All right, Chip, one thing I missed in looking at the Iowa counties, because it's kind of hidden there in the corner, Scott County has not reported any votes yet. So that would be one remaining Democrat stronghold there with the Quad Cities.
Yeah. The map that I am looking at, John, on the Senate side of things does have some votes in for Scott County, and has it leaning. Well, it looks like Greenfield's going to win that. As a matter of fact, I think we've got. Let's see. We've got about 2/3 of the votes in the precincts in Scott County, and Greenfield has a pretty controlling lead there.
All right, but right now it's a 3-point lead statewide, but still, almost half of the state to be counted yet. Which again, we noted a lot of the big Democrat strongholds, the cities in Iowa, have been mostly tallied. Other than, like we noted, Scott County's been a little later coming in.
I will tell you, a couple of campaign watchers are now saying Republicans are the favorite to hold on to the Senate. Looking at that Tom Tillis race in North Carolina, he has gone ahead. And a couple of surprises even in the House. Donna Shalala, if you all remember her as HHS Secretary in the Clinton administration, she has lost. It was a seat that the Cook Political Report had ranked as a likely D. That has actually flipped. Again, going back to Florida, and that Cuban Hispanic turnout has really gone Republican. This is going to be something we're talking about for a while, gentlemen, especially as it matters for immigration reform and Cuba policy.
Yeah.
Cuba policy, Cuba policy, Cuba policy. Circle this night, circle South Florida, circle the fact that it went for Trump and has now ousted a longtime venerable Democrat in Washington. This is something we're going to watch and talk about for a while, fellas.
And what about, have you seen any numbers on the Black American vote, Tyson, or anyone?
I did earlier, Jim. I did want to raise this, and I'll read it to you here. So it was some exit polling data that showed that Biden was underperforming. I can't tell you by how much. It was just sort of an offhanded sort of exit poll. But certainly amongst Hispanic voters, and sorry to keep beating this drum, but I'm just going to read you some numbers here. Hispanic voters for early 2020 exit polls. Florida, 2016, Hillary Clinton was plus 27 with Hispanics. Biden, plus 8.
Wow.
In Georgia, Clinton, plus 40. Biden, plus 25. Negative 15-point drop-off in Georgia amongst Hispanics. In Ohio, Clinton plus 41 amongst Hispanics. In 2020, Biden plus 24. A drop-off of 17 points. That's going to be something we're going to be talking about for a while.
Fox
when
News.
When the Trump campaign keep talking about socialist in the Democratic Party, suburban housewives didn't really hear much in that, but voters from Cuba, from Venezuela, from South and Central America heard something very distinct and very different than what those white affluent voters heard.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I will say this, for all of the Biden campaign's sort of pronouncements about seniors fleeing President Trump and sort of leaving the Trump side of the ledger because of his handling of coronavirus. It didn't matter in Florida a whole lot. I'm not saying that's not the case, but it's certainly, when you listen to the Biden campaign, they talked about feeling very confident in Florida, and they would point to polling that suggested seniors were supporting Joe Biden because they just were so terribly upset with the president's handling of coronavirus. I don't know if that was the case.
Fox is reporting Biden takes Arizona, and they finally reported Trump won Florida.
Yeah,
Right.
That's a big win for Biden.
it is a big win for Biden.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
And Decision Desk HQ
Yeah.
has declared Trump the winner in Ohio.
Really?
Yes. There's no hash marks on it anymore.
All right. Well, and let's clarify a little bit here, Tyson. I mean, the map is, as it stands right now, is not going well for Joe Biden, but there is still a path here with a whole lot of votes left still to be counted. We certainly need more clarity in Pennsylvania, although as we near the halfway point, 45% now, the president has opened up a almost 13-point lead there. So then you look at some of the other states, he's so far with only 44% counted, leading Michigan by a fair margin, leading Wisconsin, Joe Biden leading Minnesota with that same 54%. So there is still a path, either one of them at the point, Tyson, right? Remarkably, the path looks a little more clear for the president at this point.
Yeah, although Arizona, I think if Arizona had gone into the Trump count, that would have made it a little easier. I think the Biden win in Arizona presents still a formative task for the reelection of President Trump. Look, it comes down to the Great Lakes. It comes down to Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I think a lot of folks, Jim, I think you would agree, said that it would come down to some combination of those four states, and that's how it looks like it's shaping up.
Yes, because Trump won more than 270 last time, but he has to win at least one, if not more, of those upper tier states.
All right, so let's run through it, guys, as we wrap up here tonight. Chip, I'll start with you. Where are you watching the rest of this evening?
Well, I'm gonna watch Iowa for obvious reasons, and I want to see how things wrap up there. There's plenty of activity. Before we do the map wrap up,
yeah,
I'm gonna get Tommy back in here because Tommy, I'm looking at the NASDAQ in particular.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on there?
I was writing notes while you guys were educating us in the crowd, but there's a lot of pent up energy, and there's something you've heard and people talk about the Tina trade. There is no alternative, and there's just so much pent up money. And I think, unfortunately, Chip, the media focuses on the cruise ships that if they're not broke already, they are going broke, and maybe they'll make it, but the movie theaters and some businesses, but there's like the other 90% of the economy that's going crazy. And we talked about this on your show a few months ago.
Yeah.
I told you I was building this basement and I bought all this tech stuff. You wouldn't believe how long I had to wait and how much I had to pay over market to get some of these products. So the coronavirus isn't going away. You have countries on lockdown. There is a move to tech. Tech is where it's at. We may be election 2020, but when it comes to technology, we're moving to the 24s right now because we've had to do it. We've had to do it for our kids. We've had to do it for our businesses, and we had to do it for the world. So you may not be flying on an airplane, but you're going to go to that meeting. You're just going to go to the way we're doing it right now, and that's virtual, and we'll do the best we can. So there's just a tech boom, and there's so much pent-up money, and it's looking for a home.
NASDAQ futures up like 350 points. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah. And I believe at one point they even touched limits. So someone had said, but one of the things I wrote on my notes, guys, is there's really not a lot of there's not a lot of people trading. I mean, the last election, I remember how active I was trading, and you haven't seen me turn around and click the mouse once. I mean, the markets are somewhat subdued. It's all high frequency trading. If there was ever a good night if you were an influential Twitter handle or someone, I mean, if you start putting out bogus information, these computers will grab it, trade off it, regardless if it's right or not. So the human element of the markets is pretty much gone. And there's just a lot of computer trading and a lot of pent up money. But regardless, in my opinion, of who the winner is tonight, America's the winner, because we're going to move forward. We're going to look back, and whether we think fondly of the 4 years of President Trump or 8 years, we're going to look back and say, wow, 2020 was a hell of a ride.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, John. Okay. So looking at the states, what we're going to be following most closely for the rest of the night, like I said, I'm going to be looking at Iowa. I want to know what's going to happen there in my state. And the red is starting to fill in west of I-35 on the counties. Donald Trump has taken the lead in the state. Joni Ernst just moments ago on the last update took the lead. That is starting to fill in very, very nicely for Ernst. But when we look at the House races, like I said before, it looks like Hinson does have a path to beat Finkenauer. Just looking at the counties that are reporting, I mean, my county hasn't reported yet, and typically my county will go Democrat, so that might help Finkenauer there. But looking at the rest of the districts, the Finkenauer Hinton race is very tight, but it looks like Rita Hart, the Democrat's going to win in 2. Axney still looks like it still looks like she's got a very good path in District 3, and Feenstra, the Republican, is widening his lead in District 4.
And an update on a race we talked about earlier, Tyson, that Illinois 13. Rodney Davis did indeed. He's been declared the winner, won re-election there in that district in what was expected to be a tight race, but with 55% reporting, he's almost at 60% of the ballots.
That's great.
So that's worth noting. He is a House Agriculture Committee member.
Yeah,
who will be returning there. Yep. All right, Jim, what about you? What are you watching the rest of this evening? And what is the sense that you have for the rest of this evening?
Well, Michigan is, again, with only, 44%. But, boy, that Senate race there, the Republican challenger, and then the Wisconsin, Trump is showing better than expected returns, although over 50% of the votes in. But I'll continue to look at Maine on the Senate side, Susan Collins. I'm getting more confident that the Republicans are going to retain control of the Senate at this juncture. Tyson?
I agree, Jim. I think, in fact, maybe you're seeing that reflected in some of that market analysis that you and Tommy were just talking about.
Yep.
Presumably those markets at least like the fact that at most you'll have split government. Look, I'm going to watch those 4 states we've talked about for Senate races. There is a Minnesota Senate race as well. So Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all night long, and perhaps even for the next couple of days.
All right, Tommy.
Yes, sir.
What are you watching the rest of tonight, other than the NASDAQ futures?
Well, I'm going to watch the money flow. So growing up in the markets, I like to watch gold, bonds, the S&P 500, and the dollar. This thing's not over till it's over. And with all these mail-in ballots, since we started the show, it's been really slow. Now, when we talked about that, Fox News announced Arizona for Trump, the Dow Jones broke a couple hundred. So as these headlines cross, and as Wisconsin and these upper Midwest states are a big deal. So we know how most of the states were going to go. And as you guys said, there's about 5 key swing states here left, maybe 6, and that's going to be everything. And the mail-in ballots. One question I want to ask. I know we're wrapping things up. Do you guys tend to think that early voters vote more Democrat or Republican, or it's just a silly question?
The Charlie Cook people told me you can't make a blanket statement. It depends on the usual proclivity of that particular state. If it's a more Democratic state, then they'll tend to favor the Democratic Party. Vice versa, like in Texas, it would favor, the Republican side. And that made more sense to me when I heard it.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
What about you, Tyson? Do you agree with that? I mean, because again, we heard a lot of the national punditry saying that because of the president's stance on masks and early voting and absentee balloting, that the early vote would skew towards Vice President Biden. How do you think that played out in reality?
Well, we'll see, but I agree with Jim. I think there were a lot of generalizations made about early voting that are going to turn out not to be true. We'll see. But I do think the more rational election watchers were saying, hold on a minute here. You can't just assume that early votes equate to more Democratic votes. And I think they honed in on some areas like Harris County in Texas, and some of the big cities. And to Jim's point, of course, those big cities are likely to be Democrat votes that were mailed in. But that doesn't change the equation. Donald Trump wasn't going to win those counties anyway. So, I think Jim's right. I think it just depends on the area where those mail-in votes came from.
All right. And I guess we'll let the Canadian have the last word. Sean.
Is there a point in the night where we're allowed to actually go to sleep? At what point?
You probably can. I think the rest of us are going to be up the rest of the night.
I expect Chip to have not got any sleep before he gets on AgriTalk tomorrow morning, because I want to hear what that's like.
I think that's probably a pretty good bet.
But this is just so fascinating. And I'm just kind of looking at some of the results here. It looks like it's weird. 100% of the vote is in North Carolina, but they haven't declared Trump the winner yet. It looks like. I'm looking at Real Clear Politics. If you look at here, Michigan, he is. It looks like Trump with 44% of the vote. Trump is ahead. So Minnesota, Biden's got the lead with 50% of the vote. So. It all comes, as Clay Travis from Fox tweeted earlier, it all comes down to the Big Ten states, and it looks like that's where it's going to all kind of end up here, which is kind of what everybody sort of talked about from the beginning. What's interesting is that Texas has been stuck at like 74% for a very long time here. I've been refreshing. Not sure what's going on there, if that has to do with some of the mail-in ballots, but
I think they're at 86%.
Are they now? Okay.
86.
Okay,
Yeah.
Cool. So, this is, if it was a blowout, it'd be boring, and we would sit here and say, well, this is what we expected, but this is a very, very tight race, and we may be still here tomorrow night saying what's going on. So it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate you guys having me.
I appreciate you being here. And before we go, Chip mentioned that you are going to be on AgriTalk tomorrow, whether you're conscious or not. Give us a little preview of what you're going to have on the show, because it's going to be a fun show tomorrow.
Yeah, Wiesemeyer is going to be on with us too.
Yep, and I've got to do all my homework of getting the copy out on Pro Farmer of all the House Ag committee races, and then to boil down these important battleground states in the Senate.
You're busy tomorrow, Wiesemeyer, because you're on Real Ag Radio tomorrow too. So
absolutely,
you got some work to do.
The other thing that we're going to do is, I believe we've got the Farmer Forum going tomorrow, and we've got farmers from 9 different states lined up to come on and talk about the results in their states and what they might think it means for agriculture in their states going forward. We're going to have it covered from Indiana to California, guys. So we're really looking forward to the conversation with the farmers tomorrow.
Yeah, so tune in at 10 Central, 11 Eastern,
Yep.
On your local station, or if you can't find it on a local station, get the AgriTalk app or go to agritalk.com. And our coverage is going to continue on agweb.com as this election draws on. We'll keep you up to date, again, particularly on how it impacts agriculture. Gentlemen, it's been a whole lot of fun, and really appreciate the diverse backgrounds and experience, and representing both finance and politics here on here. So Jim Wiesemeyer from Pro Farmer, Chip Flory from AgriTalk, Sean Haney up in Canada at Real Agriculture, Tyson Redpath, our star for tonight from the Russell Group.
Thank you.
And in fact, we had a couple comments in the chat there wanting to vote for you for Senate already for your talk about fiscal responsibility. So Tyson for Senate 2022.
Wiesemeyer is going to be my campaign spokesperson. That's for sure.
Well, then you're doomed.
Don't get Bloomberg money. It doesn't pay.
Yeah.
And also Tommy Grisafi, who's already, I guess he didn't want to stick around for the bitter end, but thanks for Tommy.
No, he went off to trade is what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
But what this does show, bottom line, this shows that neither political party can say they have a carte blanche to do what they want.
That's right.
Exactly.
Very true.
That's an initial overarching thing.
No one has a mandate.
We got the checks and balances are still going to be in place here, guys.
Absolutely, which I like.
Yep. Love it.
I think that's good news all around there.
Yep.
All right. For Jim Wiesemeyer, Chip Flory, Sean Haney, Tyson Redpath, and Tommy Grisafi, I'm John Herath. Thanks for joining us on the special edition of DC Signal to Noise.